Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, November 8th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, Gallant says that there is nothing left for the IDF to do in Gaza. So Israeli media reported Thursday that former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant told family members of Israeli hostages that there's nothing left for Israeli troops to do in Gaza, and that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was only keeping them there out of a desire to stay in Gaza. So Netanyahu fired Gallant on Tuesday, and according to the Times of Israel, Gallant's conversation with the hostage families came just hours before his firing went into effect, and he was replaced by Israel Katz, the former foreign minister. According to Israel's Channel 12, Gallant told the families that conditions were ripe for a hostage deal with Hamas back in July, and that he tried to convince Netanyahu to reach an agreement. He said, quote, "The head of the Shin Bet, the chief of staff, and I think the head of Mossad also agreed with me," end quote. And that lines up with reports around that time saying that the Israeli military establishment was looking for a deal with Hamas, but it was opposed by Netanyahu. And during negotiations in the summer, Netanyahu began demanding that Israel maintains control of the Gaza-Egypt border, known as the Philadelphia Corridor. And at the time, Israeli media reports and comments from Israeli officials made it very clear that Netanyahu was making that demand as a way to sabotage the chances of a deal. And this is what Gallant had to say about that. He said, quote, "I can tell you what there was not: security considerations. The IDF chief and I said there was no security reason for remaining in the Philadelphia corridor. Netanyahu said that it was a diplomatic consideration. I'm telling you there was no diplomatic consideration," end quote. And again, that also lines up with reporting at the time that the Israeli military was saying, we don't have to hold on to this strip of land, but Netanyahu insisted. Gallant said Israel had no reason to keep its soldiers in Gaza. He said, quote, "There's nothing left in Gaza to do. The major achievements have been achieved. I fear we are staying there just because there is a desire to stay there," end quote. So the Times of Israel that reported this, they said that Gallant appeared to be referring to the elements of the Israeli government that want to establish Jewish settlements in Gaza. Multiple Israeli ministers and members of the Knesset recently attended a Resettle Gaza conference and called for the expulsion of Palestinians and the building of settlements. And as we've been covering quite a bit, Israeli forces in northern Gaza are currently conducting an ethnic cleansing campaign known as the General's Plan. And Haaretz reporters were just there, and they were given access to Beit Lahia, which is one of the cities where they've been doing this. And they said there was not a single house left. There was nowhere for the Palestinians to return to. So it's a really, bad situation there. And it is clear that the settlers want to move in like right away. Once they clear these areas, the settlers are going to try to go in. All right, so the next one here, Israel signs a $5.2 billion contract to purchase F-15s with U.S. aid. So Israel's defense ministry said Thursday that it signed a $5.2 billion contract with Boeing to purchase 25 F-15 fighter jets using U.S. military aid amid global calls for an arms embargo on Israel over the slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. So the contract is part of an arms sale that the Biden administration approved for Israel back in August, worth $18.8 billion. The deal gives Israel the option for another 25 F-15 fighter jets and includes upgrades for its existing fleet of F-16s and other related equipment. So again, this is being financed, this $5.2 billion contract that they signed. This is being paid for by U.S. taxpayers. It's being financed by U.S. military aid. Under the contract for the first batch of 25 jets, Israel will start taking deliveries of Boeing's new F-15IA in 2031. Not for quite a while. 7 years is when the first deliveries will start. And it's expected to receive 4 to 6 of the aircraft annually. Earlier this year, Israel signed a $3 billion contract to acquire 25 Lockheed Martin-made F-35 jets, and that was a deal also financed by the U.S. So Brown University's Costs of War Project said in a report last month that U.S. support for Israel over the past year had cost U.S. taxpayers at least $22.76 billion, and that total includes $17.9 billion in direct military aid, which is the most Israel's ever received from the U.S. in a single year, and another $4.8 billion is in spending on U.S. military operations in support of Israel, including the bombing campaign against the Houthis in Yemen. So the new contract, by their math, because they didn't factor in this arms deal, it was approved by the Biden administration in the time that they did their math, but since the money wasn't spent yet, they didn't factor it in. So adding this new deal, that brings total U.S. spending on Israel since October 7th, 2023 to $27.96 billion. Just a huge amount of money. And the Biden administration, they continue to provide weapons to Israel despite the foreign assistance laws that prohibit military aid to countries purposely blocking humanitarian aid. As we covered recently, the administration has received around 500 reports about U.S. weapons being used by Israel to kill civilians unnecessarily, but no action has been taken. All right, so the next one here, Israeli forces kill 78 more Palestinians in Gaza over 48 hours. So Gaza's health ministry said Thursday that Israeli forces killed 78 Palestinians and injured 214 in the previous 48-hour period as Israeli strikes continued across the Strip. So this was over 2 days. One strike on Thursday targeted a school-turned-shelter in the Shati refugee camp in northern Gaza. At least 12 Palestinians were killed and 30 were wounded in the attack on the Shati Elementary Boys School, which is affiliated with the UN's Palestinian relief agency, UNRWA. You see the picture here of some people at the school in the aftermath, women and children. Later in the day, Al Jazeera reported that at least 52 Palestinians were killed in Gaza on Thursday, including 42 in the north, where Israeli forces are carrying out this ethnic cleansing campaign. So, when they strike the schools, I didn't see if Israel put out a statement on it or anything on this particular strike, but they always claim, it's a Hamas command and control center, but they never offer any evidence for that claim. And we always see so many women and children being killed and hurt in these strikes. Reuters reported that dozens of Palestinian families were pushed out of Beit Lahia, which again is one of the cities where this ethnic cleansing campaign has been focused. Israeli forces have been destroying homes to ensure that Palestinians do not return. A displaced Palestinian man told Reuters, quote, "After they displaced most or all of the people in Jabalia, now they are bombing everywhere, killing people on the roads and inside their houses to force everyone out," end quote. In southern Gaza, the Palestinian news agency Wafa reported 3 children were killed by an Israeli airstrike in Rafah. So the violence, the slaughter continues across Gaza every day. All right, the next one here, Israeli soldiers mark displaced Palestinians with glow sticks. This article is from Middle East Eye. After being expelled from Gaza's Jabalia under intense bombing and following hours of questioning, Israeli soldiers handed Samir a glowing stick. He was then forced to flee south and was given a simple instruction: drop the light and you will be bombed. It is a new practice by Israeli troops in the Gaza Strip to mark forcibly displaced Palestinians, eyewitnesses have told Middle East Eye. The light sticks, originally intended for emergency signaling or visibility in the dark, are being used to indicate which group of Palestinians has been interrogated, cleared, and is following orders for forced displacement from northern Gaza. But legal experts warn that it leaves people without the stick vulnerable to Israeli attacks. as they could be seen as potential targets. Samir, 42, is one of thousands of people who has been forced out of northern Gaza in recent weeks since Israeli troops besieged the area and launched a new assault there. Rights groups have raised fears that the offensive is part of a plan to ethnically cleanse North Gaza. I mean, it's not just rights groups saying that, it's Israeli media, Israeli soldiers saying that they're cleansing the area. Forces forced to leave Jabalia to save his wheelchair-bound wounded friend. Samir fled the area last month with a group of women before encountering Israeli troops on the way. During the interrogation of the men, soldiers told Samir to head south and leave his friend, a request he refused to comply with. His friend was beaten shortly after, and when Samir tried to defend himself, he was hit too, he said. So I guess this kind of just gets into the interrogation that he had to deal with. But this idea, they told him, take this light and leave, and if you drop the light, you're going to get killed. I mean, this is... So they use these glow sticks to send the displaced Palestinians to the south. All right, so the next one here. U.S. F-15 fighter jets arrive in the Middle East. The U.S. military said Thursday that additional F-15 fighter jets arrived in the Middle East as part of a buildup meant as a threat to Iran, as Tehran is vowing it will respond to Israel's October 26th airstrikes on Iranian territory. So U.S. Central Command wrote on X, quote, "Today, U.S. Air Force F-15E Strike Eagles from the 492nd Fighter Squadron, Royal Air Force Lakenheath, England, arrived in the U.S. Central Command area of responsibility," end quote. And Central Command is the command in charge of the Middle East. The Pentagon announced last week that it was sending additional military assets to the region for the defense of Israel. I put defense in quotes there because part of the deployment was B-52 bombers, which are not exactly defensive weapons. CENTCOM said that they arrived in the region on November 2nd. According to flight and satellite data, 6 U.S. B-52 bombers are at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. Haaretz reported that the U.S. F-15 fighter jets were being sent to Jordan. The Pentagon said that it's also deploying additional U.S. Navy destroyers and tanker aircraft to the region. There's also the U.S. THAAD missile defense system in Israel and about 100 U.S. troops. Of course, those troops, that missile defense system, could become potential targets of Iranian missiles depending on how things go. And, we're not sure exactly what Iran's going to do. There's all these reports that they're going to launch a major attack from Iraq. Iraq has denied that, saying it's a pretext for aggression against Iraqi territory. But we'll see. I mean, whatever happens, the U.S. is going to be involved. The U.S. did directly intervene both times Iran attacked Israel back in April, which Iran did in response to the Israeli bombing of the consulate in Damascus. And then the attack in October, it was October 1st, Iran launched a series of missiles at Israel in response to multiple escalations in the region. So both times the U.S. intervened directly to intercept missiles. So whatever Iran does, the U.S. will be involved. And if Iran calculates that it thinks its attack is going to provoke a major war, that's going to be it. It's going to be on between Iran and Israel. They know that means it's going to be on with the U.S. as well. So if they want to get ahead of it, they might hit some American targets. So there's just always this risk of American casualties, and then that could just turn into a huge war that the U.S. would be involved in. All right, so the next one here, Israel injures UNIFIL peacekeepers in Lebanon. This article is from Jason Ditz. So Israel launched a drone strike on Sidon, a city in southern Lebanon, and it injured 6 Malaysian peacekeepers deployed with UNIFIL. And Jason points out earlier this week, Malaysia proposed suspending Israel from the UN over its various wars in the Middle East. So, there's no evidence that they targeted the Malaysian peacekeepers in response to that. But of course, people are going to be making that connection. The attack targeted a checkpoint outside the city. It killed 3 people in a car and injured the 6 UNIFIL personnel being transported in a bus. 3 Lebanese soldiers manning the checkpoint were also wounded, and one of the Malaysian troops was taken to a hospital. The others suffered light injuries. So Israel has carried out multiple military operations against UNIFIL property in Lebanon. And UNIFIL issued a statement following the incident, reminding all actors of their obligation to avoid targeting peacekeepers in Lebanon. It also advised that differences should be resolved by negotiation, not military action. And so the Malaysian UNIFIL personnel actually just arrived in Lebanon a day before, on Wednesday. So they showed up on Wednesday, and some of them got wounded the next day. All right, so the next one here. This is an interesting story. The Lebanese voted for Trump due to ceasefire promise, according to the Speaker of Lebanon's parliament. So this article is from the New Arab. Lebanon's Speaker of Parliament, Nabi Berri, claimed on Wednesday that Lebanese Americans voted for Trump due to a promise made in a cafe in Michigan by the victorious Republican candidate to ensure a ceasefire in Lebanon. In an interview, Berri was asked about Trump's popularity among Lebanese Americans. He said, quote, "He signed a written pledge for a ceasefire in Lebanon immediately upon his victory at Hassan Abbas's restaurant," end quote. So at a restaurant in Michigan, he's saying that, this is in Dearborn, Michigan, where Trump won. Trump beat Harris in votes in Dearborn, Michigan. I forget the exact percentage, but he beat Harris by a pretty good range. And then Jill Stein got a lot of votes there. She got 18%. And Dearborn is the only Arab majority city in the country. So Trump went there. I mean, it's amazing that the Democrats left this lane wide open for him. They sent Bill Clinton over there. I don't think he was in Dearborn, but he was in Michigan, justifying why Palestinian civilians have to be killed. Trump goes over there and he says he's going to bring peace. I mean, the thing about Trump is, he hasn't laid anything out. We know his pro-Israel history, and his, judging by his previous term, he's going to be super pro-Israel again. But, he didn't have to try very hard to outmaneuver Harris on this. He just went over there and acted like he cared and said he's going to bring peace. And Harris couldn't even do that. The Democrats couldn't even do that. But anyway, so this is interesting. So he visited this popular Lebanese American cafe in Dearborn. And Abbas said publicly that he only agreed, this is the owner, to host Trump if he agreed to supporting a ceasefire in Lebanon. And this is where Berri claims Trump signed a written agreement to end Israel's war on Lebanon. And we know Trump did call Netanyahu and kind of congratulate him on the escalation and everything. So, but there's a long way between now and January 20th. So who knows what the situation is going to be in Lebanon when Trump comes in. But this is interesting. And again, it really is amazing how badly the Democrats did, like trying to make it seem like they cared about all these Palestinians and Lebanese being killed with, bombs that they've been providing to Israel. All right, so the next one here, Putin and Trump say that they're ready for talks. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. Russian President Vladimir Putin and President-elect Donald Trump each said they were prepared to engage in talks following Trump's election victory. Putin said on Thursday, quote, "I take this opportunity to congratulate Trump," end quote, and he added that he was ready to speak with the incoming president. Trump also stated that he was prepared to engage with the Kremlin, saying that he thinks they will speak. So this is Kyle gets into kind of some of Trump's his history, because we have his first term to judge him on, and despite all the claims that he was a Russian agent, which is all just nonsense, he did oversee kind of a deterioration in relations with Russia, and part of that was because of the whole Russiagate thing. They didn't give him much room to maneuver, but he did oversee, the crumbling of arms control treaties and everything. One issue that could prevent a deal. So Trump also says he's going to end the war in Ukraine. Again, he hasn't really laid out a path to do that. J.D. Vance has said things more specifically. So Putin said that one of his demands for any sort of peace deal is that Ukraine agree not to join NATO. So Putin said, quote, "If there is no neutrality, it is difficult to imagine the existence of any good neighborly relations between Russia and Ukraine. We are determined to create conditions for a long-term settlement so that Ukraine is an independent, sovereign state and not an instrument in the hands of third countries and not used in their interests, end quote. So Putin's remarks followed a report in the Wall Street Journal that sources within the Trump orbit say that he will propose a 2-decade delay regarding Ukraine's pending NATO membership. During that period, the U.S. would continue to pump Ukraine full of weapons. So that's what the Wall Street Journal reported, that's something Trump is thinking. A 20-year delay. It's kind of a strange plan, especially if they're going to pump Ukraine full of weapons, because, if the U.S. is doing that, then Ukraine's not neutral. So that's something I don't see Russia going for. But talks are good. I hope diplomacy comes back between the U.S. and Russia. I mean, it's crazy that Biden hasn't spoken with Putin. There's been just no high-level contact between the U.S. and Russia as the U.S. is funding this war right on Russia's border, and actually supporting an invasion of Russia in Kursk. All right, so the next one here, Trump's next situation room. Tom Cotton will not join the cabinet. So this article is from Axios, and it throws out some names of potential people in the next Trump administration. The one good thing about this report is that it says Tom Cotton has said he would not accept. He told Trump's team that he would not be accepting any cabinet roles. There was other reports that said Tom Cotton said this, and Tom Cotton's about as bad as you can get. I mean, total neocon. So it's good he's not going to be in. But the concerning part is that it sounds like he was offered something and said no, or they approached him and he said no. So the fact that they're approaching Tom Cotton is not a good sign. So I have to do some kind of research into these names that are being floated around. Obviously, another big one that is not good is Mike Pompeo. He's being considered for Secretary of Defense. That would be really, really bad. So let's see. Here are some names. State Department, a top candidate for Secretary of State is former U.S. Ambassador to Germany, Richard Grenell. Excuse me. There's Grenell. Two other candidates for Secretary of State are Senator Bill Hagerty, who, what little I know of him, he's no good. Trump's former National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien. I know he's a real China hawk. The thing is that when it comes to China, even the people that are better than like the total neocons are still going to be China hawks. This is concerning. Rep. Elise Stefanik, she's a Republican from New York in the House. She's a leading name for the U.S. ambassador to the UN. I mean, she has been leading the charge with this like anti-Semitism stuff, like wanting to pass these laws. She went over to Israel to the Knesset and gave a speech and like really went after Biden. And I mean, nothing wrong with going after Biden, but it's just amazing to see an American member of Congress go to another country's parliament and trash your president, saying that he's got to give more to Israel, even though he's given so much to Israel. So that's just a bad sign. And then several names have been floated for defense secretary, including Mike Pompeo and Rep. Michael Waltz. Waltz could also be considered for CIA director. I don't know much about him. When these things start to become more clear, I'm going to probably profile people that are being considered here. And then, as we mentioned yesterday, Brian Hook is apparently leading the new administration's State Department team, and he could end up in a senior position. And Brian Hook is no good. He led the so-called maximum pressure campaign against Iran during the previous administration. So not the best names being floated around here. I got to think about who good potential alternatives could be. But again, I also have to kind of look into these people some more. All right, the next one here, Taiwan receives first batch of U.S. HIMARS rockets. So Taiwan's defense ministry said Wednesday that the island received its first batch of U.S.-made high-mobility artillery rocket systems, or HIMARS, and Taiwan first ordered these in 2020. So HIMARS, they're a truck-mounted mobile rocket launch system that can fire a variety of munitions, including the Army Tactical Missile Systems, or ATACMS, which Taiwan has purchased. So that this was part of Taiwan's order was the ATACMS, and they have a range of about 186 miles. The HIMARS is something the U.S. has given Ukraine. They've given them quite a bit of the HIMARS ammunition. And the U.S. approval of the sale to Taiwan for HIMARS and ATACMS back in 2020 was significant because it marked the first time that the U.S. offered weapons to Taiwan that could hit mainland China from Taiwan. I remember that at the time when it happened. The sale also included AGM-84H cruise missiles, which have a range of 168 miles and can be fired by Taiwan's F-16 fighter jets. So Taiwan ordered 11 of the HIMARS systems in 2020 and ordered another 18 in 2022. And the island's defense ministry said that the first 11 have arrived and Taiwanese troops are reportedly undergoing training to use them. That means they might be being trained in Taiwan by U.S. troops. We don't know the number of U.S. troops in Taiwan, but the U.S. sends troops over there for training. And the U.S. recently deployed troops to Green Berets to Kinmen, which are Taiwan's outer islands that are actually just right on the coast of mainland China, just a couple miles away. I mean, at one point, they're only 2.5 miles away from mainland China. But anyway, that's not related to these HIMARS. They say that they're training somewhere in central Taiwan. Taiwanese troops were recently in the U.S. training on the HIMARS at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. You see this picture here. This is from Fort Sill's Facebook page. They put this out. Again, this is another thing, the cooperation between the U.S. and Taiwan, they usually keep it very kind of secret. Well, they used to more so. It's been in recent years that they've been more open about it. And of course, China is not happy about that. And the U.S. has increased military support for Taiwan, despite these constant warnings from China that the island is the first red line in U.S.-China relations that must not be crossed. The U.S. has always sold weapons to Taiwan since 1979. That was the year that the U.S. ended diplomatic relations with Taiwan as part of a normalization deal with China. So since then, they always sold them weapons. But in 2023, last year, the U.S. started providing military aid, which was a kind of big escalation in U.S. support for Taiwan. Because again, they always sold them weapons, but military aid is when the U.S. either finances weapon sales for a country or they just ship them weapons straight from U.S. military stockpiles, which they've done with Taiwan. In September, Biden approved a $567 million arms package for Taiwan. And again, this stuff is very provocative toward China, and tensions are just really rising in this part of the world. That is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Ramsey Baroud, criminalizing UNRWA, how Israel is delegitimizing the UN. One from Ian Proud, Europe already Trump-proofing Ukraine war aid. One from Haaretz, Israel is unleashing an apocalypse in northern Gaza. One from Daniel Larison, a year of slaughter and starvation. One from Jonathan Hoffman at Responsible Statecraft. Trump now faces out-of-control conflict in the Middle East. So please go check all of that out. I did Scott Horton's podcast today. We recorded on Thursday and it played on the radio. But so that should be coming out sometime this weekend. Also, I got a shout out from Dave Smith on Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan actually followed me on Twitter. Dave brought up the interview that I did with Dr. Sidwa, Feroz Sidwa, who volunteered in Gaza and talked about all the atrocities he saw. So that shout out from Dave is getting a lot more attention on that interview, which is great, because I just think it's so important, these testimonies from these American doctors and nurses that went over there and saw this stuff with their own eyes. So that was cool. We're still trying to make the final push here with our fundraiser. We should wrap up this weekend. So if you have the means and you like antiwar.com, we are 100% funded by our readers. Go to antiwar.com/donate to see the different ways you can help us out. And just because we're close to our goal or, doesn't mean you can't give a big donation if you feel like it. But anyway, so that's it. This is the last show for the week. I will be back in a couple days with some more news for you. I hope everybody has a good weekend. Thanks for listening.